The Union Navy seems to be an underestimated part of the Civil War. Early in the war, when the Union was setting up their blockade, they wanted instead to try and capture the most important ports to make the blockade easier. Two on the Atlantic coast and one in the Gulf of Mexico. Cape Hatteras and Port Royal off North and South Carolina, and Ship Island near New Orleans. These objectives were the choice of a joint three-man strategy board composed of Army, Navy, and Gulf survey officers appointed to make a thorough investigation of the coast and harbors, their access and defenses. The fleet was far too small for the enormous job of patrolling the 189 harbor and river openings along the 3,549 miles of shoreline between the Potomac and the Rio Grande. And what there was of it was badly in need of ports of refuge, especially along the stormy South Atlantic. Out of this double necessity, the blockade gained a new dimension, one in which the Army would have a share. Not only could harbor entrances be patrolled, the harbors themselves might be seized, thus reducing the number of points to be guarded, and at the same time freeing ships for duty elsewhere. Now, as the summer of the opening year of the war merged into the drawn-out southern fall, it was the task of the strategy board, with its three-headed knowledge of the coast and harbors, their access and defenses, to select likely targets for the proposed amphibious operations. The first was modest in scope, but effective in execution. Off North Carolina, the wide shallows of Pimlico and Albemarle Sounds, enclosed by a barrier of islands and reefs, afforded the ideal anchorage for raiders and blockade runners. Here, if anywhere, was the place at which the board should point its finger. Off that stormy cape, the sea was frequently too rough for a fleet to be able to keep station. The only way to block it was to take it. At Hatteras Inlet, the break in the barrier, the Confederates had built two forts on opposite sides of the passage, Clark and Hatteras. Whoever held these forts held Pimlico Sound, and on August 26, an expedition of 14 vessels under Flag Officer Silas H. Stringham sailed from Hampton Roads to take them. Among the ships were four transports carrying 860 men under Ben Butler, who thus was given the chance to redeem his blunders at Big Bethel. He did this, and easily, for the army had almost nothing to do. Stringham, with superior ordnance, stood just outside the range of the rebel guns, and for 2 days threw shells into the forts at will. Suffering no hurt himself, Butler's men put ashore well north of the forts, 300 of them anyhow, for the surf staved in the landing boats by the time that many got ashore, marched down the island, wet and hungry, their ammunition ruined by the surf, and arrived in time to watch their general share with Stringham the honor of receiving the surrender of Fort Hatteras. Fort Clark, having run up its white flag the day before, most of the soldiers and 3 of the ships were left to hold what had been won, while the rest returned to Fort Monroe with their 615 prisoners. The Navy had taken its first Confederate stronghold, and in doing so had reduced its blockade task. The second offensive operation, down in the Gulf in mid-September, was even simpler, requiring not even the token assistance of troops. Here, the lower delta of the many-mouthed Mississippi posed a problem much like Hatteras, with raiders and blockade runners entering and leaving the great port of New Orleans almost at will. Though the threat of storms was not as constant, a tropical hurricane was something a man had to see to believe. A sandbar lurked as dangerous as reefs. All in all, the strategy board perceived that here too, the only way to block the port effectively was to seize it. The Navy had by no means prepared to undertake such an assignment just yet, but the board believed it was ready to make a beginning. Ship Island, off the Mississippi coast, would provide an excellent station for patrolling the eastern delta outlets and the passes down out of Lake Pontchartrain, as well as an ideal base from which to launch the attack on New Orleans itself, if and when the opportunity came. So the board instructed the Navy, take it. And the Navy did. Together with its uncompleted fortifications, before the Confederates were prepared to fire a shot in its defense. Thus, the Union secured its second foothold along the Succession coast.